So today we're taking my format of insert X power into battles and applying it to the entirety of Harry Potter. And to be clear, when I say battle, I don't mean a small skirmish like this, or this, or this, or okay, maybe this, but the Battle of Hogwarts is a siege and we're not talking about sieges. What we're talking about are large-scale battles with armies you might get if Fudge decided to distract the wizarding public from Voldemort's return with a return to the time-honoured tradition of beating the
bloody hell
out of the French, so I can take Harry Potter and stick it onto one of these. So battles, big wizarding battles. Are there even enough wizards for that? The wizarding world always seems kinda small. Well, the most wizards we ever see at one time is 100,000 seated at the Quidditch World Cup. We know every ticket was sold because the Fawcett's couldn't get tickets, so there are at least 100,000 witches and wizards, plus the Fawcett's. Halving that to deal with the kids, the elderly and the heavily disabled, which is almost certainly an overestimate. I mean, look at how unable to fight these two old men are. And even then we still have 25,000 aside. That's more soldiers in the Battle of Agincourt. So with that completely incontrovertible justification for this video in place, we can begin. These are all sounds I've made while trying to figure out how to structure this video, because oh boy there are a lot of moving pieces. So I've just settled on going over every significant magic thing in the Harry Potter universe, making the picture clearer and clearer as things get further and further out there. But if you're a greedy bugger and just want to see a little bit of the end results early, forget combat gear like this and this, and imagine something that's more like this. And that's just the outfit. So first, some conditions. There are a couple of things we're going to entirely ignore. First, let's be honest, you have seen this meme before. Bloody hell. Ooh, Harry Potter with guns. No one cares. Guns and Harry Potter. Get them out of here. We also have dual-wielding wands, which does happen in canon. Harry wrestled the 3 wands from Draco's grip, pointed all of them at Greyback and yelled, "Stupefy!" The werewolf was lifted off of his feet by the triple spell, flew up to the ceiling, and smashed into the ground. So it's pretty clear holding more than one wand is a thing that works. The book even says, "by the triple spell." So it's clear having multiple wands helps. My main issue here is simply how little we see people using more than one wand. Now, the fact that something in the lore is obscure, badly understood, or massively overpowered wouldn't generally put me off. In fact, it would normally do quite the opposite. But in this specific case, where the world seems to be very centralised around people with one wand, it feels more like there's some actual reason for people not carrying around 101 wands. But Harry taking Malfoy and Bellatrix's wands was plot significant at that point, and adding an extra paragraph on polygamous relationships with wands would have messed with the tone, so it just wasn't included. In any case, even if dual wielding was perfectly safe and normal, there isn't any canonical information on how it would work, so I'm just not going to discuss it. Okay, that took too long, so without further ado, I present to you my 4 categories for magic things in Harry Potter that we will discuss. Magic done with wands, potions, magical artifacts, and magical creatures, which aren't things, but let's be honest, wizards treat them like they are.
Come, Dobby.
So spells. There are lots of spells across the Harry Potter canon. Lots and lots of spells, from conjuring a splint for a leg instead of healing it,
mend bones in a heartbeat, but growing them back,
to Tentaclephoris for some interesting anime creations. However, despite the number of spells, when it comes to offensive ones, only 2 really seem to be used, Stupefy and Avada Kedavra, plus the occasional disarming spell from Mr. Expelliarmus. Now when it comes to analysing a series, there is always the issue of how many exploits in the universe have actual explanations behind them, and to an extent it's worth asking whether that matters at all. After all, if someone finds an exploit in a piece of my world building, I won't be like, I guess the constructed people are just stupid, and instead I will have to retcon some explanation in, which sucks, but with the exception of when you can lean into a world hole, it just has to be done. So for example, if I say people should always optimise their spellcasting by casting spells with each wand motion ending in the same way the next one starts, of course, silently to skip pronouncing those darn syllables, leading to an interesting range of spells being cast instead of just the 2 you see, you could absolutely say, oh, that's just not how it works in the Harry Potter universe, like dual wielding. I, however, do see something of a difference here, and I think the best way I can describe it is like this. If, in the 6th book, Harry had started his NEWT defense classes and Snape was like, "Go and purchase 15 wands. We need to overcharge those stunning spells."
Bloody hell.
What's that accent? And that would feel weird, and like something the author had just pulled out of their arse. On the other hand, if Snape had started teaching about spellcasting patterns to optimize efficiency, it probably would feel more like the introduction of apparition into the book. It was something that had already existed, but attention was never really brought to it before now. After all, duels between better trained wizards normally seem to have more complexity than just those 2 spells, so it works. Going into the offensive spells themselves, I'm going to distinguish between single and multi-target attacks. A single target attack is one that launches a projectile that causes an effect on who it hits, and just them, like a stunning spell or a killing curse, where a multi-target attack affects the location it hits, like a blasting curse. They might be aimed at only one person, but they have the capacity to hit more. So why do I make this distinction? Well, single target attacks are effectively interchangeable, because if you're hit by one and your attacker isn't an idiot, you'll be taken out in one hit. Of course, in a technical sense, there is a slight difference between being stunned, dead, and, tentacled. I mean, seriously, what is that spell? And credit to Matthew for the Harry Potter model, and Daniel for the tentacle. I'm sure neither of you had any idea of what's going to happen when you uploaded those assets. So whether you're stunned, dead, or conscious yet unable to move, trapped in your own body on the floor of the Gryffindor common room for the night, if you've been hit by any decent single target attack, you're not going to be able to keep fighting without help. In contrast, multi-target attacks are less effective when they hit someone, but come with 2 key advantages. The first is obvious. You can
Bloody hell.
up an entire group of enemies with only one spell, and while being exploded is less dangerous than certain death, barring any unanticipated mother sacrifices, it's not that much less dangerous. The second is accuracy. If you miss a stunning spell and it hits the ground next to the enemy's foot, nothing happens. If you miss an explosive curse though, well, let's just say there's a reason why Moody has a wooden leg. Of course this also risks friendly fire. And speaking of that last one, fiend fire. As we see it in its only book scene, it is something of the nuke of the wizarding world. Fiend fire is an immensely powerful, intelligent form of magical fire which just tries to burn the living hell into everything. While its travel speed is conveniently just a little slower than however fast our protagonists happen to be running, from what we see, if you lit a little bit in a muggle city, it would just grow further and further until the entire thing was eaten, unless someone cast the counter curse. Unfortunately, the only person we ever see do this is whoever the hell this is from Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. But I'm afraid there are some things I just won't do, even for a video, and spending days on a timer-based mobile game is one of them. Fortunately enough, magical fire isn't exactly rare in Harry Potter. There's fiend fire, black flames, purple flames, bluebell flames, damn that's some creative naming, and also Gabrathian fire, which does have a better name. So I would generally assume that if fiend fire is too hot for regular folks, there's some kind of similar enchanted magical fire you can just dump onto a building or shelter to destroy in moments, given magic clearly does work like that. But why does this matter? Well, it's a surprise tool that can help us later. So moving on to defensive spells. Strangely enough, one of the most popular strategies employed to avoid offensive spells is just that.
Basically, run.
Or rather, dodge. When it comes to Harry Potter, spells often seem to have an extraordinarily varying projectile speed, from the relatively slow to the fast to the literally instant. Wait, literally instant? Isn't that a bit overpowered? That's just a film thing, right? It wasn't in the books. Only it was.
I said bow, said Voldemort, raising his wand, and Harry felt his spine curve as though a huge...
well, yada yada, you get the edit. So when it comes to dodging spells, It's a lot less about seeing balls of light and dodging them, and far more about tracking where someone's wand is pointing. That is of course something very difficult to do with the naked eye, but fortunately in the Harry Potter universe, the eye doesn't have to be naked. Now, obviously there's Mad Eye's Mad Eye, allowing him to see through walls, but what I'm interested in are the omnioculars. I can definitely speak.
You can replay action, slow everything down, and they flash up a play-by-play breakdown if you need it. Bargain, 10 galleons each.
Play-by-play breakdown. That means these glasses can analyse the way people are acting on the fly and provide live feedback, like say, when someone's accurately targeting you with a wand. Of course you would probably need to be looking in their general direction, but glasses like this would be undeniably useful and for more than one purpose. This is straying into my other categories here, but it's made clear several times in Harry Potter that looking at something can cause harm to you. First, there's the very real example of people just conjuring a really, really bright light like a flashbang to distract their enemies. Eye protection would help shield from it. There's also the obvious example of the basilisk. They're not exactly a common thing in the Harry Potter universe. I mean, if they were even remotely well known, someone would have put 2 and 2 together earlier in second year, but simply the existence of a basilisk implies death by seeing something is a thing, and more importantly that wearing eye coverings of some kind can protect you, even if not entirely. In the same book, Ron gives a rant about looking at cursed books, and one would presume that glasses would also protect against that. These kinds of glasses would also be useful since presumably they could be enchanted like Moody's eye, allowing you to see disillusioned people and people under invisibility cloaks. Now exactly how rare an eye like Moody's is somewhat ambiguous, but given it begins to malfunction after Barty Crouch Jr. wears it, it seems fair to assume that it isn't some ancient lost artifact and was instead designed as a replacement for Moody, which means these kinds of eyes can be produced within the modern magical world, and if they can be, then they would be, especially by armies, given that invisibility is one of the largest issues for them. So I'm going to assume disillusionment charms and invisibility cloaks just won't really work in battle. But if you're interested, the last few minutes of my invisibility video cover that. So, looking at magical glasses in Harry Potter, I see 2 main problems that need to be corrected. First there's, well, if we get rid of this tentacle, folks summoning your glasses, or even you just having them fall off of your nose, is a problem. I see 3 main solutions to this. Firstly, you could do whatever magic was cast on Voldemort's locket to prevent it being summoned. Secondly, there's using a sticking charm to stick it to your face, which has the advantage of protecting the glasses from falling off too, but the disadvantage of probably hurting your face a whole bunch if someone tried to summon them. And finally, you could just put a strap on them to hold them to your head, which has the advantage of not needing to magically stick anything to your face. Of these, I would advocate for an anti-summoning charm and a strap, given that sounds least dangerous and entirely effective. The other problem with glasses is the sides. With normal glasses, you could easily catch some cursed sight out of the corner of your eye and die, so it would probably be best to have them designed to wrap right around your face. And speaking of battle fashion, it's reasonably clear in Harry Potter that if a spell hits your clothes, it hits you, which means the absolute last thing you'd want to do is wear large, baggy, easy to hit and trip over clothes. Now, in the defense of robes, it's not entirely clear how spells going through robes works. Maybe if it hits a baggy bit that isn't actually covering you, it doesn't affect you. But then again, explosive curses which explode wherever they hit would still be able to kill you because of how baggy your clothes are. The solution to this is some variety of skin-tight clothing, whether it be a wetsuit, unitard, sportswear, or other kind of skin-tight clothing. Adds a whole new dimension to this fight though, doesn't it? So sidelining clothes for now, we should probably actually talk about defensive spells in the defensive spells section. The one that seems to come up most is Protego, and like many spells, it realises itself in many different ways. Sometimes it's a quick single block spell, sometimes it makes a wall, sometimes it deflects spells at the attacker, sometimes it just has them ricochet off in other directions, sometimes they're just dissipated by it. Hell, sometimes they even block killing curses, although to be fair, that one is only in the films. As it is, the books make Protego far more of a spell-reflecting wall that needs to be dispelled, blocking most spells, but it can be shattered by powerful and well-placed spells. Taking that as a basic idea of how Protego works, I'm confident in saying it shouldn't be anywhere near as common as it is. When in a fight, the only reasonable time to cast a shield charm is when you can identify the oncoming spell before it starts being cast by the incantation and or wand motions, be confident that your shield charm won't be broken by the attack, and know that you've got none of your allies within ricochet range. Every other spell should be dodged or have something conjured in its path, given that both of those strategies can deal with any spell, including the Killing Curse. Obviously, dodging is a bad idea if you've got allies behind you, so I think conjuring things will probably be the standard, ideally doing so far enough forwards that if whatever you conjure explodes, you won't get hurt. As for what is conjured, I would suggest something very soft and non-harming when exploded, like a pillow. For reference, conjuring items appears far more difficult than the shield charm, but that's for high schoolers, not professionals, and since there's no mana in Harry Potter, I don't think it would be a deciding factor. Once you'd left school, you would just be good enough to conjure pillows. So here I'll just add that I don't think anyone would use Finite Incantatem in a fight, because it doesn't really do anything unless the spell's already flying towards you, and dodging is additionally useful because you can counter an attack while doing it. Cool. Protective enchantments are the wards of Harry Potter. They're large-scale, locational, defensive spells. Now, a lot of these enchantments are rather vague plot devices for defending areas, and given they all seem two-way, I don't think most of them would be particularly useful in a battle unless you want to turn that battle into a siege, with one major exception. How anti-apparition enchantments work may be one of the single most important factors to how magical battles would work. If an army has the ability to prevent apparition on the battlefield and they're not attempting to retreat, they'll probably use it. And if both armies can, it's almost guaranteed to be used. This is due to a simple issue of power and control. With apparition enabled and everyone presumably able to apparate, then, especially with the deadly, fast and ranged attacks wands provide, the battlefield is likely to turn into an uncontrolled free-for-all with spells flying in all directions, friendly fire all over the place, everyone terrified, and as such, vast amounts of desertion. Now, this isn't the only conclusion to apparition in battles, and I even have a video out on teleporting in battles, but all things considered, no one will want apparition in battles, least of all the troops themselves. And of course, no army is going to want to train both for apparating battles and non-apparating battles, when they could just focus on the latter and use the enchantments in every engagement they have. But this leads to the question, can anti-apparition enchantments be placed on battlefields? Maybe? The problem is we never actually see someone erect anti-apparition enchantments. Insert penis joke here. Hermione might have put them up around their tent whilst travelling, but if she does, it's not clear. Regardless of whether she does though, I think it's pretty fair to assume that anti-apparition protective enchantments go up in more or less the same way as we see the other ones do, given every other protective enchantment has more or less the same casting. As for that method of casting, when Hermione puts up enchantments, she only takes a few seconds to cast each enchantment and circles the area as she does it. At first I thought that last part might be a problem, but then again the Hogwarts teachers clearly cast their spells out of windows, so maybe circling the area is just something to help visualize it. Based on this, I think it's a fair assumption that anti-apparitions can be placed with relative ease. As for removing them, this is also something we never see, apart from maybe the taboo when people say Voldemort, since that's supposed to destroy protective enchantments, which sounds very overpowered, but then again, Voldemort is supposed to have invented unpowered flight, so who knows. In any case, super wizards and new magic aside, I doubt either army would want to destroy anti-apparition enchantments at the start of the battle, and given both sides would probably work on putting them up, I'm going to continue under the assumption that apparition can't be used within the battlefield. Okay, so there are just a few additional spells I want to throw in here that I think could have their own unique effects on battle. First, we have smoke-creating spells of all varieties. These range from Fumos, a smokescreen spell which creates a screen of smoke, believe it or not, right up to Nebulous, which can just fog up a city in seconds. Based on this, I doubt it would be at all easy to see on a magical battlefield, unless the glasses can do heat vision, which we never have any evidence for. The entire place could easily be coated in fog the moment one wizard wants it to be, and even through the fog, people would be likely to additionally conjure smoke to protect themselves from the enemy fire, making the air even more impenetrable, and potentially necessitating leaving bubblehead charms on at all times. Additionally, to clear the air, cleaning charms like Scourgify might be used, or maybe just vanishing charms. Next is Aguamenti. A jet of water is much harder to block than a spell, just because it obviously spreads out all over the place. Blocking it with one shield would be very difficult. In terms of military effectiveness, water cannons have often been used on rioters and peaceful protesters as a mostly non-lethal way of dispersing people. Obviously an organised battle and a riot are quite different things, but the basic principle that people covered in water lose a lot of their fighting energy still applies, and various other spells could be used with Aguamenti to make it more lethal, like Glacius, which releases a cold of freezing air, which could presumably flash freeze the water to a person. As a counter to this, wizards could use hydrophobic materials to make their skin-tight clothing out of, and dry themselves with hot air charms. Okay, that section took way too long, so let's knock out our first potion quickly. Felix Felicis, or Liquid Luck, best known for transforming Harry Potter from an angst ball of subtlelessness
Is that what you told Tom Riddle, sir, when he came asking questions?
into a mean, lean manipulating machine.
Well, then by all means come along, sir.
It is often referred to as a plot-breaking instant god mode, and that is mostly done by people who forget literally every time the potion is used other than by Harry, specifically by Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and presumably Neville and Luna, in the quote-unquote Battle of the Astronomy Tower. Unfortunately, like certain other things, someone decided the battle wasn't worth the movie cut, so you get some other fight footage instead. Aren't I supposed to be doing this one quickly? Right, the others had a lot less liquid luck than Harry, but it is made clear the more you drink the longer it lasts, not the more powerful it is. So going into battle with a full dose of liquid luck each, what happened? Well, they dodged better. Obviously they were fighting Death Eaters, and even with the help of the Order they were still just kids, so staying alive at all is something of an achievement, but given liquid luck is toxic if you take it with any level of regularity, very difficult to make, and ominously disastrous if made wrong, with a 6-month brewing time, I don't think it would be that useful. As for why it helps Harry so much, well, Harry is smarter and more manipulative than he looks, at least in the books, and the potion didn't do much more than just give him a plan, some confidence, and the knowledge of where Slughorn was. Useful, yes, but a decent general should have all those things, and without the need to replace them for every battle so they don't get poisoned. So next there are a bunch of healing potions. Most of them would be useful for getting injured troops back in shape, but as we see from the amount of time Harry spends in the hospital wing, healing isn't instant. So on the battlefield I doubt anyone would take anything more than the Wiggenweld potion, which cures minor injuries and replenishes stamina, at least according to most of the video games. If that's not canonical enough for you, there's the Invigoration Draft, which invigorates a person and is mentioned in the Order of the Phoenix. There are various other similar potions which some might consider non-canon, like the Extimulo potion, which boosts spell power. If it's canon, you bet people would use it. Fortunately, none of these really revolutionise the battlefield, just boost certain traits of the user, and the same can be said for lots of canonical potions like the Wit Sharpening potion. What does bring up an interesting question, though, is the strengthening solution, given that people don't really use physical attacks in Harry Potter. Despite this, it seems reasonable to expect people would carry some kind of weapons, especially given they can be conjured by magic for free, much like how real soldiers carry knives despite having clearly superior guns. As for strengthening solutions and similar, it really depends on how cheap and easy it is to make, as well as whether your muscle memory adapts to your new strength, because if it doesn't, it could be problematic. Another interesting one is the Calming Draft, which, depending on the strength, could be used to help people with the various stresses that come with battles. And finally there's the Polyjuice potion. Obviously it wouldn't be of much use in the battles themselves, but could be used to replace enemy soldiers, infiltrating their ranks until the enemy leaders can be replaced and lead their own army into a trap. Obviously there are various protections against this, like security questions, but various preemptive measures could probably be used too. To take someone's form with Polyjuice potion, you need a bit of the person you're turning into. This is usually hair, but it doesn't have to be. Firstly, to protect your hair, people would likely shave all their hair off, and if they don't want to do that, they would want to cover their hair with a turban or one of these to ensure people can't easily steal it. Likewise, any other bodily excretions would need to be vanished lest they be stolen and used in Polyjuice potion. So I guess this wasn't quite as stupid as we all first thought. So first things first, when it comes to magical items, I'm immediately removing all unique magical items, because they're unique, so not really relevant to like 99.999% of battles. Likewise, as I've already said, invisibility cloaks are out. The next thing we're going to immediately remove are the Time Turners. because of the sheer instability of them and how incredibly specific their safe usage is. Now, getting into things that might actually be used, Goblin Wrought Silver is an enchanted form of silver which makes incredibly tough weapons and armour. In terms of weapons, they're good and all, especially if you dip them into something that will enhance them, but ultimately they just make a melee weapon a little more effective. As for armour, it really depends on whether it blocks spells. However, if it does, the Killing Curse is very clearly unblockable outside of separate objects, and Harry-based shenanigans. So I think it's pretty fair to say Killing Curses would still kill a person in goblin-made armour, hence wearing it just encourages your enemies to use deadlier spells against you. As such, it probably wouldn't be very useful. Speaking of armour-deflecting spells, though, we should probably get back to our skin-tight wizarding combat equipment. Firstly, what's it made of? Obviously, nothing you do to this suit is going to make it immune to Killing Curses, but as long as it doesn't force you to wear a bulky and probably quite heavy armour, there's no harm in using protective materials to help with the shrapnel and weak curses. Per the Philosopher's Stone, Hogwarts students require one pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar. Since we don't know what similar is, and dragon hide isn't insanely expensive, I'll just say the suits are made of it. Another addition to the suits could be the same enchantments Fred and George put on their shield hats, blocking minor jinxes, given they seem to work. And finally, we reach broomsticks. Now, in this video, I've covered a lot of things that at first you might think would absolutely revolutionise combat. Apparition? Surely combat will be one gigantic swirl of apparating people. Nope! Anti-apparition charms. Invisibility? Surely the entire battlefield will be invisible folks creeping around and trying to detect each other by whatever means. Nope! Those means are far too overpowered. But broomsticks? Flight? I've looked into it, I've thought about it, and there's just no answer. You can't stop it. More than that, the other magic conspires to try and get the battle into the sky. Look at, for example, the biggest issue with flying. While you're fast, you're visible, and you can't get behind cover. But then again, those in the sky have the cover of the magical fog, and what use is ground cover if someone can detect you down there with an Omenum Revelio, and then shoot past you at least 150 miles per hour, launching a wave of cursed fire at the ground? It's a surprise call that'll utterly obliterate anyone who has the sheer audacity to not be up in the sky, and able to fly away. I would go so far as to say the entirety of wizarding battles would take place in the sky, with landing being extraordinarily dangerous. Wars would be fought in flying formations, like giant, low-to-the-ground dogfights. Of course, flying combat does come with its own problems. First, presumably magical clothing can keep you warm and the bubblehead charm can keep you oxygenated, which deals with most of the basic survival problems. Of course, with the speeds that flies can go, it seems relatively likely people would be constantly in danger of shooting out of the anti-apparition enchantments, and potentially that those enchantments would just be entirely useless because of it. But I'm not so sure. Simply put, whilst outside of any anti-apparition enchantments, you can never be too sure if an enemy just outside of your view will spot you and apparate right behind you, then deliver a lethal injection of Killing Curse to the back of the head. But within anti-apparition enchantments, you're somewhat safer, creating something of a safe zone in the area around where the battle started. Safe zone is relative though. When you're flying, it's far easier to dodge enemy spells, but whilst there aren't any tracking spells in Harry Potter, at least as far as I can tell, there are tracking objects, specifically bludgers from Quidditch games. The use of bludgers in warfare is somewhat questionable, given that as we see them, they randomly attack without an idea of friend or foe, apart from when Dobby is directly controlling it, but as evidenced by Hagrid...
Blimey! Harry's got himself a rogue bludger! That's been tampered with, that has!
It's possible to tamper with bludgers, targeting specific people, like, say, the enemy army. This adds the additional dimension to combat of non-sentient combatants swarming you. Fortunately, bludgers would be easier to stop with shields, as they don't have much in the way of intelligence, and getting hit by one isn't that bad as long as it hits you in the skin suit and not the more vulnerable broom, wand or face. As such, people would probably be trained to try and lean into bludgers if they get close enough and the wizard doesn't have enough time to use magical defences. This of course entirely disorientates the victim, allowing easier strikes from other nearby wizards or even more bludgers, mobbing the wizard until they fall from their broom and or are bludgeoned to death. Wizards are also shown to be able to conjure birds to follow and attack a person, which would work in a similar way to disorientate someone and give you a clearer shot. So obviously you don't want to be noticed by your enemies in the air, and whilst invisibility is out, camouflage isn't. To briefly explain, Moody's eye can clearly see through objects. However, I think it's pretty safe to say he's not constantly doing it. I mean, hopefully, considering his job. Anyway, I would assume Moody can immediately see through invisibility cloaks because they're magical, so the eye's like, hey, that's magic, I'll look through it. But when faced by camouflage, the eye won't see any magic, so it'll just look at the exterior unless specifically instructed, hence camouflage would work. Of course, you could say, well, why not just look through everything to help you see through camouflage? But if your eye is looking through everything, then wouldn't it also look through the flesh of the person, making them invisible to the looker? This is also why I didn't bring up magical eyes looking through fog. If you're just looking through everything, you'll see nothing, and as such I would assume you first need to be looking at a thing to look through it. So some kind of aerial camouflage. Fortunately enough, visual aircraft camouflage is a thing, albeit it's not considered massively important considering radar and infrared detection exist now. There are various strategies here for various different types of aircraft, so what kind of an aircraft is a person on a broom? One of the biggest questions here is of speed, because at the time of the books, broomsticks seem to be going through something of a revolution, with the Nimbus 2000, fastest broomstick in production as of 1991, significantly outpaced by the 2001, to the extent that it's visually obvious, and then the 2001 being even more significantly outcast by the Firebolt just 2 years later. The Firebolt itself can go from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 10 seconds, so very, very roughly, I'll say that that's the maximum speed of your average broom in a battle, because quite honestly, numbers will vary a lot over time, and since that's the only number we have, I'm taking it. Taking a quick look at the history of airspeed records, it's clear that 150 miles per hour was surpassed sometime in World War I. Unfortunately, aircraft camouflage basically started in World War I, which meant no one really had a clue of what they were doing. However, the tactics of nowadays suggest that slower, lower-to-the-ground aircraft are painted more in ground colours, while faster, higher-up ones tend to be more sky colours, with aircraft in the middle sometimes having ground colours painted on the top and sky colours painted on the bottom. Whilst I'm in no way, shape or form qualified to make this decision, I would say that broomsticks are probably in that middle spot, since they're sure as hell not faster than modern jet planes, but nor are they helicopters, and whilst wizards could fly high, I doubt they're going to be going that high. This creates a basic picture of clothing colours, assuming wizards fly with their back facing generally up and their front facing generally down. But we also need to take into account the fact that the battlefield would probably be coated in fog. This means that the camouflage on the clothing would likely be broken up further with fog patterns to help hide them. If they're fighting at night, they would want to wear black, potentially still broken up by the fog patterns. I should also bring up the flying carpet, with which you could make a larger chariot formation. But given you can fly with one hand and curse with the other, multiple people on a broom or flying carpet sounds like it's just putting all of your eggs into one basket. Okay, finally the last category, and we're going to try and get through these nice and quickly. First, we'll remove all unintelligent species that can't fly, because they can be drive-by cursed fired. Basilisks included, since whilst they're incredibly deadly, they're not exactly great at avoiding friendly fire, and are a huge target. We'll also remove all species that are impossible to train or domesticate, dragons included. Although, if you want dragons on the battlefield, I've got a video for that. Damn, I'm good at self-promotion today. Ignoring Pottermore species, who we know all about, and animals that are basically just muggle animals, that leaves Doxies, fairies and pixies, which are all basically small creatures that can't do much more than pester people, hippogriffs, griffins, and winged horses, which are all kick-ass steeds that turn you into a large and slow-moving target. Okamis expand to fit their space, which sounds like a very dangerous thing to bring onto a large battlefield. Phoenixes are great at blocking single killing curses, but not much else. And Firebirds are your standard kick-ass sitting duck steed, which has the additional advantage of transforming your standard foggy smoke-filled battlefield by adding a storm to it, which sounds about as dangerous to your side as your enemies. Then there are the sentients. Centaurs, merfolk, giants and ogres are all pretty technologically incompetent and can't fly, which would make them easy pickings. Leprechauns, dwarves, hags and vampires we know bugger all about. Werewolves who drink wolfsbane then go into battle in the full moon would probably be pretty darn powerful, but that's only physically powerful, which doesn't matter too much, and only on the full moon. Otherwise they're basically just wizards. Vila appear very human-like, but it's not too clear, so who knows. Goblins are presumably very deadly at close range because of their goblin-made weapons and armour, but not from the sky. And we have the important one, house elves. Now, in terms of physical combat, we only see house elves fighting a few times, most of which are just Dobby. When the house elves burst out of the kitchen, they're described as fighting with only knives and cleavers, while Dobby is twice seen using combat magic, both times on unsuspecting foes. Once banishing Lucius Malfoy and once disarming Narcissa. Now, considering Dobby disarming Narcissa requires neither projectile nor even pointing at her, I mean, but there was another loud crack, and Narcissa's wand too flew into the air. That's not... there's no... I mean, it just happens, like house elves have god mode. If it works like this in a battle, then the battle is basically just house elves without any humans arriving, because they're instantly disarmed and rendered harmless. And in all honesty, I only really have one solution to this particular problem, using sticking charms to bind people's wands to people's hands. This is the best I can come up with, but I mean, house elves are just OP. Next, house elves can banish people like this. Fortunately, the book is a bit more ambiguous as to how this works, and in the film there's a clear, slow-moving projectile that could be dodged, which leaves only the house elves' ability to apparate within anti-apparition enchantments. Considering the relative rarity of house elves, there wouldn't be enough to just stick one house elf on every broom to help them get around. You could definitely ask why armies wouldn't just set up house elf breeding camps to bolster their numbers, but then I could ask you why the bloody hell you just made me thought about house elf breeding camps. In any case, we don't really know much about house elf reproduction. I'm just gonna take the number we see in canon as a standard, since you'd think rich folks with house elves would want them to be reproducing as much as possible anyway. Instead, assuming that house elves don't have any additional combat magic we don't see, I think they'll probably be best used as combat medics, taking injured troops, ideally directly out of the sky, to some kind of a safe house where they could be attended to medically, and ideally taken straight back into the fight. And finally we have the less alive magical creatures. Boggarts, Kaipora, and Banshees don't really appear to work for people, so they wouldn't be used. Ghosts are interesting because they can't do much in terms of actual fighting, but they can more than make up for it in harassment and intelligence. If you can persuade ghosts to side with you and they're capable of travelling to the battlefield, assuming it's within haunting range if ghosts abound like that, then they can fearlessly fly straight into the enemy, either returning to their allies with knowledge of the enemy movements, or, if that's already known, just harassing the enemy troops to try and distract and dissuade them. Poltergeists have the additional ability to interact with the physical world, potentially pushing foes off of their brooms, although it's clearer that you can use magic against poltergeists. Finally, Inferi are sitting ducks, as are zombies, which leaves only dementors, that would be risky to put on the battlefield since they affect everyone, but if your enemies can't use Patronal they'll be screwed, so there are times they might be useful. So in conclusion, battles in Harry Potter would be flying, very fast-paced affairs through clouds of fog. Mid-air threats would primarily be other flying wizards, and wizards would likely often get into dogfights, ideally with the assistance of flying formations of their allies. Additional threats would include cursed bludgers aiming to unseat and beat to death flying troops, as well as harassment by ghosts and poltergeists. Individual fights would be quick and deadly, with dodging being the primary strategy for escaping enemy spellfire, and flying away being very dangerous as it leaves you open to attacks. The spells used would likely be a mixture of highly dangerous single-target ones, as well as the occasional multi-hit spell, mainly fired directly into flying formations. Many potions would be used before and even during the battle to give the soldiers strength and reactions beyond the dreams of us muggles. The soldiers themselves would likely wear skin-tight camouflaged suits with either bald heads or head coverings. Additionally, they would wear magical glasses enchanted like Moody's Eye, and carry a knife or similar on their person, potentially placed with the carried potions. Before entry into battle, soldiers would likely place a bubblehead charm onto their head, and a sticking charm to hold their wand to their hand, and maintain these spells for the duration of the battle. And injured soldiers would likely be removed via house elf, where they could be quickly healed and potentially return to the same battle. And that's just the gist of your average battle in the Harry Potter universe. Damn, that was a lot. This script was about 3 times the length of my normal ones, so I'm going to try and finish quickly. This video was supposed to have come out several weeks ago, just before going on holiday. Unfortunately, I messed up my timings and the video wasn't done in time, but I'm back now though. If you enjoyed and watched this video all the way to the end, consider subscribing. There will be more videos like this, and you won't see them if you don't. Not the next video though. That will probably be on a fictional language called Skach, which is almost entirely unrelated to this video. Anyway, thank you for watching, and good night.